Hello everybody and welcome into Dark Souls 3. This is the third part of a video series in which I go through the FromSoft catalog and figure out if we can one-shot any boss at the maximum New Game Plus cycle, Dark Souls 3 being New Game Plus 7. Thank you so much for the support on the previous videos and a very Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays for all of you who might be watching. Hopefully this video comes out on Christmas or maybe a couple of days after if I planned it correctly. And yeah, this one is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to be showing the setup and build that we use on the right side of the screen for the bosses as opposed to doing a pre-roll introduction. That way you can kind of see what I'm taking into the boss fights and how we are trying to one-shot these bosses. In addition, I'm also going to, unlike previous episodes, I am going to be doing the entire boss fight for most of the bosses. I know there's a couple that I don't, particularly some of the later game bosses that just have a ton of HP. And I'm going to be determining what I call the minimum number of hits for a quote-unquote perfect run. That being, what is the maximum amount of damage we can do to a boss in one hit, and how many hits would it take if we were able to replicate that every single time. So, with that said, let's get into it. First up is one of the best tutorial bosses in all of FromSoft. In fact, I think it is the best tutorial boss in all of the catalog that I've played. Udex Gundyr, and I'm doing this a couple of different ways to show you kind of how the setups are going to work for this run to see how we are going to be able to max out our damage. I'm doing this both melee attempt and with miracles, which are generally the stronger of the three magic classes, being miracles, pyromancies, and sorceries. Vort of the Borea Valley is next, and if you go on his wiki pages, you'll actually notice that he has a lower absorption to dark damage than he does to lightning damage. However, the reason that we are primarily using lightning and sunlight spear is that there's not a high damaging dark miracle outside of Life Hunt Scythe, which also grants you HP, making it very difficult to stay in the Red Tearstone Ring and Marion Blade Rage. Make our way to the first optional boss of the run in the Curse Rotted Greatwood, and this boss is obviously pretty, I'll say, infamous in the fact that it has some weird mechanics where you have to break off the stacks or the polyps from the boss itself, which does a large chunk of damage and staggers the boss out of its normal attacking phases. This one's a little tricky to say exactly how many hits, which you'll see in the summary page that I'll have up after a couple more bosses. But sit back and enjoy this fight that was a lot longer than I anticipated and quite a bit more chaotic than I had planned. The Crystal Sage is one of the first large variations that you'll see, while the majority of the setup is very similar to the first couple bosses that we did. And in this fight, we use Wrath of the Gods, which does physical damage. I also tried this with parry and riposte, but it does not do enough damage to one or two shot. It's also a three shot, at least in the way that I was testing. And getting the proper parry timing down with Crystal Sage is very annoying when you are trying to stay in that red Tearstone ring range with Power Within. Deacons of the Deep are kind of interesting as well. This was one of the bosses that I thought coming in we had a shot at one-shotting, given its mechanics. If you watched Dark Souls 2, you'll know that the couple of bosses that we were able to one-shot in that were part of gank fights, and I was thinking that the Archdeacon, even though it spawns in with about 2/3 of the total health bar that the boss has, that we were going to be able to one-shot it. Unfortunately, that was not the case, as you'll see with the Hollow Slayer Greatsword, which does the extra 20% damage to all hollowed enemies, deacons included. So instead, I went back and did the Wrath of the Gods as well, because you can kind of bully the boss with that miracle as they get stun locked. Some of the smaller deacons fall down, and it makes this fight a complete joke. So our first 5 bosses down, and unfortunately we were not able to one-shot any of them. I really thought coming into this run that Udex Gundyr and the Deacons of the Deep, I thought we were going to be able to do at least one of those two. The cards just didn't shake out in our favor. We got really close to Udex Gundyr. You see on the screen there about 800 damage shy, which is a lot, but it's really not that much when you consider some of the numbers we're putting up. So yeah, the maximum number of hits that we would have to take to kill a boss in this first 5 is 3, with the exception of the Curse Rod at Greatwood. Again, that fight's a little weird because of how I guess they call them polyps are. So unfortunately, no one-shot here, but still some really strong boss runs. So our first Lord of Cinder is the Abyss Watchers, and you'll see in this fight that I am using miracles, and I don't know why this didn't cross my mind to talk about this a little bit at the summary for these next 5 bosses, so I'm doing this after I recorded those. I don't know why I didn't try to do a backstab or parry riposte fight against these guys. If somebody else wants to do the run through of the entire New Game Plus cycle and try that out to see if you can actually one-shot them, be my guest. I don't really feel like doing it. I don't think you can, but it might be possible. So I'm going to chalk this one down as a no with a very, very possible maybe. High Lord Wolnir is a very frustrating boss to fight in these. You'll find if you search up some regular base game one-shot in Dark Souls 3 that it seems like you're able to take out his bracelets without much difficulty in just regular New Game, but I was finding that it was not possible using the Great Club with its Ash of War, or weapon scales I guess they're called in Dark Souls 3, because if you do a heavy attack after you use it, you get this little nifty 3-hit combo. You'll see as I go throughout the fight, I land more than 5 or 6 hits, I think a couple of times, and I was not able to break the bracelets. Might be possible if you do something like the Dragon Slayer Great Axe and you are in that hyper mode range. Unfortunately, keeping that up in this fight, as you kind of seen in some of these past ones where it's these long, drawn-out, multi-minute fights, is incredibly difficult, so that's why I went this way. The old Demon King is by no means a difficult boss, and this was one where I tried to do a true two-hit R2 combo with the Black Knight Great Axe. This is really only able to be done on the initial because the startup time for the old king himself is a little long and makes this difficult to do on subsequent tries. If we were to do that, it would be 4 hits. So instead, I went through with Crystal Soul Spear, and I'm just going to show you a neat way that you can stun lock him if you are in high New Game Plus cycles. Here is where many people say the true difficult Dark Souls 3 bosses begin, and Pontiff Sulyvahn. You'll see in this fight, our parry riposte on that initial walk-in does a ton of damage. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is the third highest damaging hit that we were able to do in this run at just under 6,000. I'd have to check my numbers, which is more than half of his HP. Again, this is another boss where it's very difficult to stay in that range because he does this weird AoE after you do enough damage to him, and he summons the clone. So getting another parry and post on him proves to be very difficult. You know, in many of these fights that I've done, they're all somewhat enjoyable because when you go into a boss fight with a specific goal in mind, you're not really frustrated whenever you die quickly. However, Aldrich was one of the first obstacles that really got in the way of some of my enjoyment. So instead of doing a complete and drawn out, quick boss kill, I instead decided to do kind of a long form without power within just to make this a little bit more palatable. And even though we don't nearly come close to one-shotting him, you're able to see that we can get rid of Aldrich in very short fashion, even without some of our extra buffs. For our next set of bosses, again, no one-shots, and some of them are actually getting into the 4 and higher number of hits before we can kill them in this cycle. The best we could do was against Pontiff Sulyvahn, which we did just over half. Again, if that's a perfect run, that'd be kind of hard to pull off considering how the phase transition works for him. And when he does that AoE attack, you kind of gotta like reset all your buffs and whatnot. It was really close on the Abyss Watchers as well. I thought for sure we were also going to be able to one-shot those guys. You know, I might have to go back and see if that's the case, and maybe I should have done this before, but if I'm looking at the amount of damage we could do to the Pontiff, it's almost 6,000, and I see the miracles, and I am about at 4,000, so I don't know why I didn't do that. Maybe I tested it in New Game Plus 6 and didn't do that properly, so maybe if I have some time at some point, I might go back and retry that, you know, using a parry or maybe a backstab. But it's so darn difficult to get those guys with the phase transition that I guess I decided to do miracles. So for Aldrich as well, if I didn't mention this in the fight, which I'm doing these voiceovers a little separately, I did not have power within during that fight because it was a long, drawn-out fight. I just calculated the maximum amount of damage I was able to do to Aldrich and multiply that by 20% to give a rough estimate of 2395. It's probably not perfect, but it's high enough that I think it's comfortably in that range where we could say that a 4-shot would be possible. Good old Yorm is next on tap, and he is one of the very few bosses that we do another melee attempt on. Obviously, he's a gimmick boss, and I don't really mind him. The past few times I've fought him, I've done it the non-Storm Ruler way, which makes for an interesting fight. I don't know if it's a good fight, but I do kind of like fighting him with the Storm Ruler, and you can see that we just do massive amounts of damage. I think the second highest in the entire game to any boss at just under 15,000. That might be the highest. There's one more boss upcoming that we might do a little bit more damage to. I did make the mistake in this fight in doing a riposte on his head because I thought that that was going to do quite a bit of damage. Turns out we should have just gone with the weapon skill. Either way, he's an easy boss at any level of New Game Plus cycle. We're doing the Dancer next, and I could have done her a lot earlier, but I kind of wanted to go in the natural boss order that one would find themselves on if they are playing the game regularly. Again, like Vort, she has a weakness to dark, but like Vort, the only damaging spell that we really could find use that does dark damage, at least miracles, would be Life Hunt Scythe, and instead I just decided to go with a lightning focused attack once again. The Dragon Slayer armor is one of the few enemies that you'll fight in this game that has a very high lightning resist, where Sunlight Spear is not the best option against him. So we're just gonna chill out, camp around the fog wall, and do a very quick kill on the Dragon Slayer armor. Similar-ish to the old Demon King, although it's not quite a stun lock, so to speak. It's still a very easy fight. Osiris is a very janky boss. Nobody will argue with that. I did this fight a little bit safer than you probably need to. As you'll see, I take, I think, 5 hits to do it, whereas if you do some of the damage calculations, you could actually do it in 3. But this was another one of the bosses that really got on my nerves when I was trying to do this, because of the run back and some of the general fight jankiness. So instead I played it a little safe, but still got a kill in under 25 seconds.
Dear little Oscar, where have you gone? Are you hiding from me? Come out.
Champion Gundyr, I think, was the only fight in this entire game, the play cycle, that I did not do to completion because he was annoying me. Because, again, like Osiris, the run back is really annoying with all of the hollows. So you'll see we're able to theoretically do 2 hits and take him out, but this was one of the fights that I show that I don't actually complete on camera. Getting into the late game of the non-DLC bosses, and I just want you to take a look at Yorm's HP in New Game Plus 7, a colossal 57,609 HP. At the same time, the maximum amount of damage that we can do to him is just under 15,000, which I think, again, if we could do that damage to any other boss in the game, I think would be enough to one-shot all but a couple that being Gale and Dark Eden Midir. Again, in that fight, I did 5 hits because I did the riposte on his head. I should have just done the weapon art. And then another one to take note, Dragon Slayer Armor, who I think has the... It doesn't have the least amount of HP in the game on New Game Plus 7, but comparatively speaking, he's got a really low amount of HP, where at the same time, he's the first boss that we could not do more than 2,000 damage to, which is very interesting. There might be some possibilities, maybe Soul Stream or some really big, hard-hitting abyssal weapon because he is an abyssal enemy and he takes extra damage from those weapons. As it stands, real close to the Gundyr fight again. 2 shots, which is pretty good, but everything else is more than a couple, which I don't know what that says about the game. I think it definitely means that the boss design of some of these later Souls titles, some of the current Souls titles, are a lot tougher, but maybe it's just some of the damage stacking that you can do in these games is not quite as much. Anyways, let's get on to the home stretch. And here we have the Ancient Wyvern. If you know Dark Souls 3, you'll know that this boss is able to be one-shot no matter what, with any weapon, as long as you're able to do a plunging attack. I tried a couple of times to do some of the cheeses or glitches, whatever you want to call them, where you're able to do it off of one of the ledges at the starting area. I could not get it done, so instead I did the actual fight way, just dodging all the enemies instead. And this is our first and, spoiler alert, only one shot of the run. One of the best bosses in all of Dark Souls 3 is up next in the Nameless King, and when I was doing some testing in New Game Plus 6, I was very disappointed, as you'll see very shortly in this video, in that the King of the Storm is oh so very close to being able to be one-shot in its first phase. This is another fight where I don't show the entirety of Phase 2, because it's kind of a slog, and the setup for a quick Nameless King kill is quite a bit different than a Phase 1 King of the Storm kill. Twin Princes were probably the most frustrating boss fight that I did in this entire run. I think I tried them upwards of 25 times because I kept getting killed in the first phase or the phase transition because of how the boss mechanics work. Important to note, you can parry Lothric in the first phase, or sorry, Lorien in the first phase. You do a little bit of extra damage. It's not enough to turn like a 3-shot into a 2-shot. You're able to 2-shot him no matter what. And I was able to get the proper spacing to see what we could get for a full-on direct hit to Lothric after we get the spacing right for the phase transition. But unfortunately, I was not able to finish that fight off, and I ended up dying, at least in this recorded portion of the video. before we do the actual final boss of the run in the Soul of Cinder, I'm going to tackle the DLCs, both the Painted World and the Ring City. I did the Champion Gravetender first with a critical hit melee attempt. I did try a couple of miracle attempts with the wolf itself, but the wolf is very annoying to fight at the best of times, and I just didn't feel like getting a good read, so that's why you'll see on the next summary page I don't actually have an estimated number of hits, but we're able to do good damage. Again, it's an NPC boss fight that is, it's a 2-on-1 after it gets down low, so we're able to do a good amount of damage, but no one-shot. So for the next couple of fights, we have the very difficult and maybe somewhat infamous DLC bosses that are just damage sponges on regular runs, not even considering New Game Plus 7. So you'll see on a couple of these, I actually went and just made my character invulnerable just to get a read on what we could do in theory. The first one against Freed, when we do the critical hit backstab, that one was legit, but when we tried to get the second phase miracle damage, and I'm using that because Ariandel's resistances are pretty low to lightning, all damage, but lightning we know can do a ton of damage. We were actually able to hit both of them with one Sunlight Spear, which does a ton of damage, but good luck trying to do that consistently if you're able to drag that fight on for that long. So obviously in this group of 5, these are some of the most iconic fights in this game, as well as the Champions Gravetender and Great Wolf. And we do in fact have our first, and spoiler alert, only one shot of the entire run. Of course, if you've ever played the game, you know that the Ancient Wyvern has a gimmick mechanic where anytime you do a plunging attack, you do 100% of his HP. So if you didn't watch that fight in this video, just know that, again, that's the only boss that we were able to one-shot at all in this entire game. I was really, really, really hoping that we could one-shot the King of the Storm, but we were 100 damage shy, and I don't think there's any way that we could possibly crank that up. All the other bosses, honestly, they're pretty reasonable in terms of the amount of damage compared to their max HP, but I would not say that any of these fights specifically would be able to be done in such a way that you could actually do these realistically. If you were going to try these fights and try to 2-shot or 3-shot some of these bosses or some of these phases, it would be incredibly difficult, especially something like Sister Freed and Father Ariandel, just given how that fight works. Just a couple more to go, and then we'll send it off. Similar to Freed, the Demon in Pain and Demon from Below, as well as the Demon Prince, just have way too much HP that I'm just turning myself invulnerable and figuring out the maximum amount of damage we can do with the Black Knight Great Axe. So that's why this fight looks quite a bit different than some of the ones I've done up to this point. So Half-Light's an interesting boss fight because I am fighting offline. We're actually fighting the regular Half-Light, and we're able to do good amounts of damage. We're actually able to one-hit the Painting Guardian that is summoned, and we are able to two-hit Half-Light himself. This is one where I think if you were to summon somebody who had really low HP or was deliberately set up to take a ton of damage, say wearing all three clutch rings and the whatever I think it's called the Calamity Ring, it's probably doable, but for the general gameplay, I'm not going to count this as a one-shot because of reasons. So Slave Knight Gale, if you've ever fought Slave Knight Gale, maybe the best fight in all of Soulsborne. I'd have a hard time thinking of any. There's maybe some Elden Ring fights that I like, maybe a bit more. Like I really like the Hoaraloo fight, but Slave Knight Gale out of all the Dark Souls 3 bosses is my favorite, and plenty of other people's favorites. This is one where I'm just testing what the maximum damage we can do. There are plenty of videos of people doing all sorts of crazy things to Gale. You know, Soul Level 1, New Game plus 7, plus 0 weapons, you know, fists, I'm sure, beating him with random game controllers. So I'm not going to bore you with a long drawn-out fight in this video. You can go watch some of those. But again, for theoretical damage calculation purposes, this is what I was able to do.
What still here? Hand it over, that thing, your dark soul. For my lady's painting.
Similar to Gale, Midir, I don't like Midir quite as much. This isn't a diatribe on the bosses that I like in Dark Souls 3. It's not a terrible boss, but I like some dragon fights from different games. Like I like Plaza Deus Ex a little bit more than this fight. But we can actually do a surprising amount of damage to Midir here at New Game Plus 7. And once I show the splash screen at the end of these last couple, you'll see that Gale actually was going to take the top spot for the minimum amount of hits, if that makes sense. Midir you can do in less than 10, whereas Gale I don't think you can do in 10 or fewer. And finally, we come to the final boss of the series in Soul of Cinder. And personally, I do enjoy Soul of Cinder. It's not my favorite final boss, at least in the canonical game order. I think that goes to Radagon and the Elden Beast, but I do quite enjoy the Soul of Cinder fight. Maybe it's the music, maybe it's the ambiance, but it's a good fight. And surprisingly, it has very low lightning resist, which is a little interesting. I know it's not Gwyn itself, but I thought for whatever reason, when I was going to do some research, I thought that the Soul of Cinder had quite a bit higher lightning resist than it actually does. Last but not least, in our last 5 of the game, we have some of the most iconic fights in all of Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, as well as Half-Light. And you can definitely see that Slave Knight Gale and Dark Eater Midir really take the cake for just how much damage those guys can face tank. But surprisingly, after all of this, I thought that Slave Knight Gale was going to have the lowest amount of damage taken. It's actually the Demon Prince, who has a comparatively low amount of HP, but his resistances are just juiced like crazy. I'm not sure the exact reason why they didn't just crank his HP way up and keep his resistances down a little lower. Anyway, that's a diatribe we don't need to get onto. For Dark Eater Midir, I do have maybe 8. So 3120 times 8 is just under 25,000. In fact, it is 24,960. But if you've ever fought him for an extended period of time, you'll know that once he gets down to around 20-ish% of his HP, you can riposte his head for massive damage. And I figure if we're doing 3k a pop with the Dragon Slayer Great Axe, then that 7th hit would probably get him into that phase, and you'd be able to finish him off. I didn't want to do that fight like that, so I didn't. It's just a hunch. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But yeah, so that rounds out Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I would love it if you would leave a like, a comment, or a subscription. And be sure to be on the lookout for my next video, in which I'm planning to do the same thing for Demon Souls. And I got a feeling that we're going to be able to do just a little bit better, given some of the mechanics in that game. Until then, see you next time.